Gary from North Carolina.
Gary from North Carolina, what's on your mind?
Hi, Emma. I know this is usually more of Sam's thing, but are you ready to debate a men's rights activist?
Are you a men's rights activist?
Sorry, no. My parents raised me to be a feminist. I'm definitely not one of those.
Well,
so for the chat, that was a meta joke. The sequel is never as good as the original. I do have a serious question.
You sounded way too normal to be a men's rights activist, honestly, just by the tone of your voice. But continue.
Sorry, I'll try harder next time. So here in North Carolina, Harris obviously lost, but we had very successful state level elections. So Democrats won governor, lieutenant governor, attorney general, Secretary of State, Superintendent of Public Instruction, which is basically like head of schools, and very close race for the North Carolina Supreme Court. And I'm curious if any of you have any sort of ideas about why there was like a 5 or 6 point swing on a lot of those. Like the governor race was an obvious one because the Republicans put up an atrocious candidate, but all the other ones, you had a chunk of people who apparently voted for Trump and then voted for the Democrat at the state level. So I'd just be curious what you all think.
Well, I mean,
Trump is a popular guy.
It's crazy to say, even with his unpopular, like the part of, I'm trying to be critical of like what I miss basically. And like his approval rating doesn't mean shit because people may say he's a bad guy and Harris was ahead in favorability. Like a majority of Americans thought she was a decent person. But doesn't mean they're going to vote for her. Like Trump is the dirty Harry of politics, or like the scumbag that gets things done, or whatever it is. People like that. There's a long history of that trope in this country, and there's a long history of rich guy and prosperity gospel, meaning someone who's successful and who can lead this country. I mean, in a late stage capitalist world, a rich guy who played a rich guy on TV, kind of makes sense as an avatar for like, who also maybe somebody that people find distasteful, but they still think he could be effective. That really is his broad appeal. And so I've kind of lost what your question was. One
thing I'll say on favorability and unfavorability is often those are looking at registered voters or likely voters and not just adults generally. So if Trump, and that's why Trump is dangerous, because again, like I wanted to hope that the outreach to like wrestling people was like, they say like the MMA or UFC watchers are like the least likely to vote. But if you get a little bit of them, all of a sudden you're doing a lot, and those people might not show up in like a likely voter favorability rating. And
they'll show up and they'll vote Trump and nobody else.
Yeah, because fuck the Republicans too.
Right, exactly. And we saw this in AOC's district, which is a majority Latino, and that's also the group that the Democrats lost the most ground with in this election. People just either came out and voted for Trump and voted for nobody else down the ballot, or they voted for her as well down ballot. And that's just something we have to reckon with.
Well, and that's what's interesting. So if you look at, we'll need the Pew stuff for like actually really good data after the fact. But if you look at the number of votes, like in North Carolina, there were clearly a lot of people who actually literally voted Trump and then also voted the Democrat at the state level. So it's not just that he got votes and the Republicans didn't. Like clearly a bunch of people switched over.
And again, it's not like directly related, I think, to the genocide in Gaza, but it's a part of a picture that was portrayed where, Obama's appeal in 2008 was in big part because he opposed the Iraq War. Yep. And
that's why I liked him.
That's why I liked him too. I think that the Democrats and Biden helping commit genocide hurt their brand in a real way. That paved the way for the dynamic that you're describing. But also, we should point out that Mark Robinson was running, so that's people maybe I don't know.
I'm a black Nazi guy.
Yeah, the black Nazi maybe played a role.
Yeah, and he got clobbered. He lost by 15%, but the other races were still like 3 point swings back and forth.
I mean, the hope is
Thank you.
Like
Appreciate
Trump,
the call.
the Trump juice dies with Trump. God forbid they're somehow able to bottle it and pass it off to these other freaks.
They haven't been able to.
They've tried. Tried. Half of Trump's appeal is that he's not them. Like you've been saying, like a big part of Trump's appeal is that he is not them. To be fair, a big part of Obama's appeal, like especially in terms of the Iraq War, is that he was one of the only Democratic politicians who hadn't voted for it. Like, so, I think likely the Republicans will have the same problem that Democrats had, which is that they're going to learn all the wrong lessons from Trump and then try to implement them with like copycat candidates down the line, which are going to become progressively less appealing because they're going to have none of Trump's charisma and all of the stink of the Republican Party. Like Trump is essentially an independent running in the Republican Party. And in a lot of ways, like he taps into a just general dislike of all of our politicians because a lot of people just like watching him like take it to them. Like that's it. Like they like watching him take it to the Democrats, take it to the Republicans.
And the Republicans.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Of course.
I mean,
that was a big fat mistake.
Right. And again, the campaigning with Liz Cheney.
Of course.
The voters that know that Liz Cheney opposed Trump trying to overturn the results of the election are already that Venn diagram is a circle of people who are already voting for Kamala Harris. Everybody else that hears the Cheney name thinks, oh, isn't that the guy that basically killed nearly 1 million people. Iraqis?
In order to enrich his friends, honestly. And it has the exact opposite effect. I was watching that stupid Pod Save America episode with all of the high-level Kamala campaign staffers. It felt like I was at a meeting at like a startup, and it just upset me so much. But one thing that I don't think they understand, they were trying to reference like, oh, well, we wanted to paint Kamala as not this far left figure by having her attached to like the Cheneys. But I don't think what they understand is that what that has an impact or that what that affects is how people perceive Republicans too, which it just normalizes them. Yeah. So like you think that it's going to make people think that you're less progressive or like not a crazy communist, but it's also going to make people think Republicans are okay. And that just means that they're going to be more tempted to vote for Republicans and make excuses for Trump. Like a lot of people just see the president as like a figurehead who stamps off on what Republicans do in Congress. And so maybe you have to put up with Trump, but he's not going to be the one who actually like makes the laws. Like there are just a lot of weird ways in which it makes people vote more for Republicans than. But
it's also just not a spectrum of political like left to right in the way that they view it. I mean, Kamala Harris being perceived as too liberal, there was nothing that could change that perception because she's a black woman from California. They went about it in a way that made no sense. I think it is rational for them to be like, how can we appeal? I mean, I don't know, right?
I don't think she came across as too liberal. I think she came across as too establishment. And I think that's the main
exactly.
Spectrum there. Like Trump still comes across as anti-establishment.
Yeah.
Despite the flaw.
Part of it, though, is that the everyday American does not view these ideological terms in the same way that we do. Yeah. Like when we say liberal, we're talking about like a Pod Save America or something. When they're talking about liberal, they think of like woke activists and like the most far left. Like that's who they view as liberal because that's what Republicans have basically taught them. Just like how, the right tries to redefine even like what the far right is by being like, what is far right? Is that just like me because I voted for your blue collar worker who voted for Trump? Like they have successfully to the broader public redefined these terms to the point where people just don't really understand what they're describing when they call something liberal. That's a huge
and Republicans, when they have a big glaring weakness, they don't run away from it. Like when it's perceived as a weakness, they attack other people on stuff and then just like keep it moving. And I think that like running scared thing of it, I don't know. Like, how was Barack Obama perceived in 2008? Like, I bet there's plenty of people saying he seems pretty liberal, and he won massively
because he was anti-establishment, at least in people's minds.
Right. Right. If we're talking about like the major factor being that Trump positioned himself as anti-establishment and who Kamala decided to connect herself to, I don't think it's the Cheney connection that was as harmful as the Biden one.
Oh yeah.
She refused to even distance herself from Biden, and in doing so, she.
When you have a campaign staff of all Biden's campaign staffers, what do you think they're telling her?
That's what I assumed at first too. But then you hear these reports that she also didn't want to say anything because she was loyal to Biden for I guess everything he's done for her and putting her in that position to begin with. Picking her as the VP.
Gotta have a killer instinct.
Yeah, that's the thing. When people say she's a bad politician, like it's true in more ways than I think people seem to want to believe or understand. Like
it's her
connecting herself to Biden.
And I'm sorry,
she was connected to Biden no matter what, but she
didn't deserve her loyalty. He didn't deserve her loyalty. He tried to sabotage her the entire time. He put her in a corner. He
sabotaged her the second he said he was staying in the race.
Exactly. He said that no one else could beat Trump when everyone was saying Kamala should be the candidate on TV, undercutting her. I mean, and he did that the entire time. So, like, there's honestly his treatment of her. Frankly, there was misogyny and racism on his end as well, and the way that the staff set her up. Yeah.
Well, I mean, we just have to be honest about who Joe Biden is. I think there's been a lot of revisionist history when it comes to Joe Biden. And frankly, if it weren't for the fact that his ego was so big, he could have rode away on a white horse into the sunset. If he had been a one-term president, his position as Barack Obama's VP had totally redeemed him in the eyes of most Americans, I think. 'Cause most Americans didn't know how intrinsically linked he was to some of like the worst policies that have come out of the Democratic Party in the past 20 years, or like the Anita Hill hearings. And so he could have rolled away on the sunset. And so a lot of people, when he came in 2020, they just invented this new version of Joe Biden that he has never been. Like when they were calling him like honest Joe Biden, like serial plagiarist and pathological liar Joe Biden, like Joe Biden lied about how his own son died. Like Joe Biden is like not a good man. A lot of people wanted to feel good about voting for him, but he's never given really any indication that he has changed, except for maybe softened on being like a segregationist, like as time has passed. But like he floated at the beginning of his political career a constitutional amendment to ban busing for integration. Yeah. I mean, and we can say he changed on those things, but I think the underlying personality that he had of being like egomaniacal just never changed. And we got to see like him sink the Democratic Party's chances, because if they had an open primary, I don't think Kamala would have come out, through the whole thing unscathed. And it seemed like he only dropped out when he knew for sure he was going to lose and become embarrassed. And then he was like, whatever. And then he waited till the election was over to pardon his son. That's Joe Biden. I could believe that if Kamala actually tried to distance herself from him, understanding who Joe Biden is, he would have come out and made it even more unlikely that she would have won. Like he would have thrown like a tantrum or something, possibly.
They were saying that
pissing Biden off might have worked in her favor. This was a referendum on how people view the Biden presidency, and people look at it now as a total failure.
One way to look anti-establishment is to have a giant fight with the president of the United States.
With your boss.
Right. Yeah, I think it would have worked in her favor if he did.
It would have, but
maybe. What dirt do they have on her? She's a fairly boring person. We know the worst about her when she was a federal prosecutor. There's nothing else really out there about her.
Because they were saying this on the PodSave thing. They were alluding that people in the White House would start to leak if she criticized Joe Biden, which goes back to the ultimate villain in the story, Joe Biden, who is a bully. He's a brute.
Leak about what, though?
They were afraid, or at least they claimed to be afraid, that they would leak that she was basically there when all of those decisions that she was complaining about currently. Like, has she complained about Joe Biden? I don't think anyone would have cared. I think that's all.
Yeah, I don't know why that's a big deal. People would have looked at that as relatable. People are sitting in the meeting room when their bosses are making bad decisions all the time and they can't do anything about it. I think that would have been very relatable, honestly.
I also think that it's cope because they hadn't taken any step in the past 4 years to establish a strong narrative about Kamala Harris in the media, apart from like her failed expeditions down to the border. Like they made it seem like there was no way since 2020 for Kamala Harris to like actually build herself up as an independent brand when she was vice president, because like she couldn't have done anything other than what Joe Biden said. And clearly that's not the case unless Joe Biden was actively trying to bury her political career in order to not overshadow her.
He was.
Which I believe.
100%.
But like they make it seem like it was just by chance that no one knew who Kamala Harris was. Like Kamala Harris could have gone on a Sunday morning talk show every week for the entire.
Biden did it under Obama. Right. They would send him out to Ellen. They never did any of that with her. He was afraid that her youth would look bad for him, and he set her up to fail.
Absolutely.
That is the situation.
To be fair, I'm pretty sure she wasn't running for president yet when she went on Drew Barrymore. So God bless whoever let her do that. So we got the mama thing.
Yes, at least we have that.
But also, to be fair, a real politician with a real cutthroat desire to be president would have made it work. And she did not try to make it work anyway. In those points prior to when he finally dropped out, during that interview on Pod Save America, they were like, they hadn't even considered the possibility of him dropping out up until a point where he like failed that debate. But it's like, Joe Biden is a 79-year-old man with a history of strokes. You had never considered the possibility that Kamala Harris might have to take over as the vice president, not just to be the head bureaucrat or head administrator, but like to campaign in the upcoming election. That doesn't make any sense to me. That's also a political failure. There's a lot of cascading failures here, but it just shows the Democratic Party needs to be replaced from the top down. Like from the staff up to like the actual politicians.
Go ahead, Matt.
I mean, I've said all I feel on this, but if we want to pivot to Joe Biden being in Africa now, because I would say the thing with Biden is he was not competent to be president. Put aside the actual policies, just as an elderly man, he was not competent. And so here he is. He had not traveled to Africa in his 4 years until now. I don't know if you guys are familiar. It's like one of the continents on our globe.
Bucket list.
Rather important. So he went to Angola to meet with a bunch of African leaders. And this is the image that entire continent of people get from the leader of our country going.
Of people, goods and services, but will also promote shared prosperity and inclusive growth across the region. Internal consultations aiming at aligning this project with national priorities and other bilateral and regional commitments. In closing, allow me to reiterate Tanzania's commitment to regional integration and shared prosperity. We note the progress made on the development of the Lobito Corridor and commend the visionary leadership that has brought this initiative to life. And it is through such partnerships and innovations that Africa's Agenda 2063 will be realized. I thank you.
It's like my grandpa in church and my grandma kicking his shin saying, "Wake up."
In Africa, we call him Brother Sleepy Joe.
One of the worst presidents of all time.
It's weird because like you said, he started good, and I think that whole discussion we were talking about how he's a very egotistical guy. I think it got to his head, honestly, too. Like I remember those early, like after his first couple of wins, those early articles or punditry comments being like, he's going to be more progressive, a better president than Obama, and
domestically he was. He was. I mean,
right, but it's clearly went to his head to the point where he decided he's staying in the race,
But this is. I mean, him falling asleep as African leaders try to talk, are speaking is kind of just cherry. I mean, that's all you need to know from this individual, really.
You know me, I'm not a patriot. I'm not a jingoist. I'm not a Western chauvinist. But I think that stuff like this just weakens America in the minds of our enemies and allies abroad. Hate to say it, Africa's deciding whether or not to go with China or go with the United States of America every day. And G would never do this. He wouldn't do that. And Putin wouldn't. And frankly, I think Americans, especially the Western chauvinists and jingoists, will see the transition from Sleepy Joe to belligerent Donald. That's now we're going to get more respect on the global stage. That's chaotic. No one's going to respect Donald Trump either. But it's, what does that mean for the price of goods in America? Who's to say?
I think it affected Netanyahu's lack of. Biden's ideologically a Zionist and a genocidal maniac. This is not to absolve him of anything, but in terms of just the humiliation that Netanyahu put him through, just for a guy with that kind of ego, I don't think it registers how much.
I think that's the one thing where. I think that's the one area where it didn't matter. I mean, I think Netanyahu knew he had Biden on a leash, whether Biden was, doing jumping jacks for the hours-long meetings or otherwise.
I know,
he knew exactly where Biden stood, and even from when he worked with him under the Obama administration, and Biden's leaking shit to Netanyahu, undermining his own administration.
Right, I understand that, but I just think like maybe on more of the finer details where it's like about. I don't think he would have wanted to look so pathetic and weak if he was fully all there, basically. And I do think Netanyahu made him look pathetic and weak, and he looks pathetic there. And honestly, I was dismissive of this, and my fiance was making this point to me, and he was just basically saying he can't do the job. He looks this. Do you know how this looks? Everybody thinks he's old and pathetic. Prior to the debate, like maybe in 2022, he was saying this to me, and I was like, okay, yeah, but like, right, he's the incumbent. Of course, he's going to run again. But I do think this did him and his age and him being so obviously incapable did deep harm in terms of public trust. Because as we talk about democracy and we talk about how dangerous Donald Trump is, the man falling asleep there and clearly incapable of doing the job to the fullest capacity shows an unseriousness and a lack of commitment to democracy, because nobody wanted him to run again. Not the Democratic base, not independents, and anybody that the Democrats needed to win over. So he displayed an arrogance that I think reflected poorly on the Democrats' core message about about Trump being dangerous, because just by existing in the way that he does, he doesn't show that urgency.
Urgency is the word.
Yeah,
I agree, but I would also echo what you're saying and dig a little deeper and just say it's just one patch in a whole quilt of reasons to not trust the Democrats. Now, it might not have turned off everybody, but there are some people who viewed this as the straw that broke the camel's back. And that's just not just like how it impacted his ability to like prevent the genocide or to choose to facilitate the genocide in Gaza, but just the very act of him being like not there was enough to break people's trust. People whose trust in the Democrats was already tenuous to begin with. And then a separate group of people were also turned off by the genocide. And so like there's just something for everybody here. Like the Democratic Party is already suffering from a really big trust gap when it comes to people thinking that they have anything in their gas tank beyond just like acknowledging the problem and then choosing to like not do anything about it. And when you have like Joe Biden falling asleep, you turn off a whole separate group of people who are just like, well, like, how's this old man going to deliver anything for me and my family because he can't even stay awake on a trip to Africa? Like,
right. Right. Exactly right. All right, let's get to some clips. I think did we get that all out of our system, our Joe Biden hatred?
Hey, folks, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and check out our daily show. We do it every day at 12 p.m. Eastern for about 2.5 hours. We even take phone calls. You should check that out.